My wife ignored me for 2 years until another woman noticed me. I walked away from neglect and took back respect, confidence, and my freedom. 2 years. That's how long my wife had zero interest in me. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, in every way that actually matters in a marriage. And before you think this is some sob story about a broken man, let me be clear. This is about what happens when a woman takes a good man for granted and then gets the reality check she never saw coming. It started gradually. First, she stopped initiating any physical contact. Then she began finding excuses every single time I tried. Headaches, stress from work, too tired, too busy. There was always something. When I suggested we spend time together, she'd rather scroll through her phone or watch another reality show. Date nights became a thing of the past because she was never in the mood to go anywhere. I tried everything a caring husband would do. I planned romantic evenings, bought her flowers, took on more household responsibilities, thinking maybe she was overwhelmed. I even suggested couples therapy, believing we could work through whatever was causing the disconnect. Her response was always the same dismissive shrug and some variation of, "We're fine. You're being dramatic." Conversations became purely functional. "Did you pay the electric bill? Can you pick up groceries? Your mother called." That was it. No good morning kisses. No how was your day. No meaningful connection whatsoever. We were roommates sharing expenses, not husband and wife sharing a life. The worst part wasn't the rejection itself. It was the way she acted like this was perfectly normal. Like a marriage could survive on autopilot indefinitely. Whenever I brought up the elephant in the room, she'd get defensive and turn it back on me. "You're being needy. Marriage isn't just about physical stuff. Maybe if you didn't pressure me all the time." Pressure her. I was asking for basic affection from my own wife. But apparently that was too much to ask. She made me feel like some kind of pervert for wanting intimacy with the woman I'd married. The gaslighting was so subtle, so consistent, that I started questioning whether I really was asking for too much. Friends would ask how things were at home and I'd give the standard "everything's great" response. But inside I was dying, not from heartbreak, but from the slow erosion of my self-respect. I was becoming one of those men who beg for scraps of attention from their own wives. The kind of man I used to feel sorry for. The breaking point came on our anniversary. I had made reservations at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. I bought her a thoughtful gift. Everything you'd expect from a husband who still cared. She forgot, completely forgot our anniversary. When I mentioned it, she gave me a look like I was ridiculous for expecting her to remember. That night, as she lay in bed scrolling through social media instead of acknowledging what day it was, something clicked. I realized I had been operating under the assumption that she still cared about our marriage. But her actions told a different story. She had mentally checked out long ago, and I had been trying to resuscitate something that was already dead. The next morning I made a decision that would change everything. I stopped trying, not with some dramatic announcement, but quietly. No more romantic gestures. No more attempts at meaningful conversation. No more pursuing someone who clearly didn't want to be pursued. I went to work, came home, handled my responsibilities, and focused on myself. If she wanted to live like roommates, then roommates we would be. But I was done playing the desperate husband chasing a woman who had made it crystal clear where I stood in her priorities. Little did I know that this decision would soon reveal just how quickly a woman's indifference can turn into something else entirely when she realizes she might actually lose what she's been taking for granted. The first few weeks after I stopped trying were liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Instead of coming home and attempting to engage with someone who clearly didn't want to be engaged with, I started doing things I had neglected for years. I joined a gym, started reading again, called old friends I'd lost touch with while I was busy trying to fix a marriage only one person was working on. My routine changed completely. I'd wake up early, hit the gym before work, and come home focused on my own goals instead of trying to decode her mood or figure out what I had done wrong this time. The constant tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders began to fade. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore, wondering if today would be the day she'd finally show some interest in her own husband. She didn't notice at first, or if she did, she didn't care. I'd come home from the gym and she'd be in the same spot on the couch, scrolling. When I started cooking healthier meals for myself, she'd just order takeout. When I went out with friends on weekends, she barely looked up from whatever show she was binge-watching. The physical changes came quickly. I'd always been in decent shape, but now I was actually putting effort into it. New clothes that fit properly, better grooming, the confidence that comes from taking care of yourself instead of neglecting yourself while chasing someone else's approval. I wasn't doing it for her anymore. I was doing it for me. My social life improved dramatically without the constant stress of a one-sided relationship. I became more relaxed, more fun to be around. Friends started inviting me to things they hadn't in years, probably because I'd stopped being that distracted, stressed married guy. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 2 years I had tried everything to get my wife's attention, and she couldn't have cared less. Now that I had completely stopped trying, I was getting attention from everywhere else. Women at the gym struck up conversations. The barista at my coffee shop started remembering my order and asking about my day. Colleagues who had never shown interest before were suddenly more engaged when I spoke in meetings. It's amazing how much more attractive you become when you're not desperate for validation, when you're not constantly worried about someone else's mood or approval. You carry yourself differently. You speak with more confidence. You laugh more easily. You're just more present in your own life. My wife's indifference continued exactly as it had for the past 2 years. She never asked about my new routine, never commented on the changes in my appearance, never showed the slightest curiosity about where I was going or what I was doing. If anything, she seemed relieved that I wasn't trying to engage with her anymore. I noticed something interesting. While she wasn't paying attention to me, I was paying less attention to her. And when you stop focusing on someone who doesn't want your focus, you start seeing them clearly. I saw how she had let herself go, not just physically, but in every way. She had no interests, no goals, no passion for anything, except her phone and whatever drama was playing on television. The woman I married had been ambitious, funny, engaged with the world. This version was someone who had decided marriage meant she could stop trying, stop growing, stop being interesting. She had become comfortable in her complacency, assuming I would just accept whatever minimal effort she was willing to give. 3 months into my new approach, I felt like a completely different man. Confident, focused, surrounded by people who actually wanted to spend time with me. I had rediscovered what it felt like to be valued, even if it wasn't by the person whose opinion had mattered most for so long. That's when my buddy invited me to his birthday party, just a casual get-together at his place. I almost didn't go because my wife had been invited too, and I wasn't sure I wanted to spend an evening watching her ignore me in front of our friends. But then I thought, why should I skip something I'd enjoy just because she'd be there? I had no idea that this decision would finally wake her up from her 2-year coma of indifference. The party was exactly what I needed. Good music, good friends, and for the first time in months, I was somewhere with my wife without feeling like I was carrying the weight of our dead marriage on my shoulders. I wasn't trying to include her in conversations or making sure she was having a good time. She was an adult. She could handle herself. She immediately found a corner with a couple of the other wives, settled in with her phone, and occasionally looked up to nod at whatever gossip was being shared, same old pattern. I grabbed a beer and started catching up with people I hadn't seen in a while, actually enjoying myself for once. About an hour in, I was standing near the kitchen when a woman walked up to grab a drink. I'd seen her at other gatherings, before, but we'd never really talked. She was a friend of a friend, recently divorced, and had this refreshing, confident, direct energy, the kind of woman who actually engages when she speaks to you. She struck up a conversation about the music playing. We ended up talking about concerts we'd been to, places we'd traveled, books we'd read, simple stuff. But after years of conversations that never went deeper than household logistics, it felt revolutionary. She laughed at my jokes, asked follow-up questions, maintained eye contact. You know, the basic things you do when you're actually interested in the person you're talking to. The conversation flowed naturally. She teased in a playful, intelligent way instead of the cutting, shallow way I'd grown used to. When I made a sarcastic comment, she came right back with something equally witty. It was verbal sparring, but fun instead of exhausting. At one point, she mentioned she was thinking about getting back into hiking and asked if I knew any good trails. I told her about a few I'd been planning to check out myself, and she said casually that we should go together sometime, not heavy or loaded, just 2 adults enjoying each other's company. The whole interaction lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it was the most engaged I'd felt in a conversation in years. Here was someone who found me interesting, who wanted to hear what I had to say, who could keep up with my sense of humor. It reminded me what normal human interaction was supposed to feel like. I was about to suggest we exchange numbers, when I noticed something that made me pause. Across the room, my wife was staring directly at us. Not a casual glance, but the focused, intense stare of someone paying very close attention. For 2 years, this woman had barely looked at me when I was standing right next to her. Now, from across a crowded room, She was locked on like a heat-seeking missile. The change in her body language was dramatic. She had straightened up, put her phone down, and was completely focused on my conversation. I continued talking, but I was aware of the attention. It was almost amusing. 5 minutes of normal conversation with another woman had accomplished what 2 years of begging for my wife's attention had failed to do. When the conversation ended naturally and the woman went to find the bathroom, I decided to test my theory. I walked over to get another beer, deliberately taking a path that brought me closer to where my wife was sitting. Sure enough, her eyes followed me the entire way. The look on her face was something I hadn't seen in years. Intensity, focus that had been completely absent from our interactions for months. For the first time in forever, she was actually seeing me. I didn't go over to her. I didn't acknowledge the staring. I just got my beer and kept enjoying the party. But something had definitely shifted. The woman who had been indifferent to my presence for 2 years was now tracking my every move. I didn't have to wait long to find out what she was going to do about it. As the party wound down and people started saying goodbyes, I felt her appear beside me for the first time all evening. "I'm ready to leave," she said with an edge I hadn't heard in a long time. The ride home was going to be interesting. The car ride started in silence, but tension radiated from the passenger seat. She stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, hands folded tightly in her lap. I turned on the radio and drove casually, like nothing had happened, because honestly, nothing had. I'd had a conversation at a party. We made it about 3 blocks before she couldn't contain herself anymore. "So, who was that woman you were talking to?" she asked, trying and failing to sound casual. I glanced over, genuinely surprised. "Which woman?" "I talked to several people tonight." "You know exactly who I'm talking about," she snapped, voice sharp. "The one by the kitchen, the one you were flirting with." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "Flirting?" "We talked about hiking trails and music." "If that's flirting to you, I guess I've been flirting with the checkout clerk at the grocery store too." "Don't act like you don't know what you were doing." She turned fully in her seat now, anger flashing in her eyes. "I saw how you were looking at her, how she was looking at you." "How was I looking at her?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Like you were interested. Like you wanted to be there with her instead of with me." I had to process that for a second. Interested in having a conversation with someone who actually responds when I talk? Yeah, I guess I was interested in that. It's been a while since I've experienced it. That hit home. She went quiet for a moment, then came back swinging. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that woman and I had a 5-minute conversation that was more engaging than most of the conversations you and I have had in the past 2 years, and now you're acting like I committed a crime." "I'm not acting like anything. I just think it's disrespectful to your wife to be flirting with other women at parties." I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. "Let me get this straight," I said calmly. "For 2 years you've shown zero interest in me. You avoid physical contact, you brush off any attempt at meaningful conversation. You've made it clear you'd rather do literally anything else than spend time with your husband, but 5 minutes of me talking to another human being who actually seems to enjoy my company, and suddenly you're concerned about respect." She didn't have an immediate answer, so I kept going. "Where was this concern about respect when you forgot our anniversary? Where was it when you stopped touching me, stopped talking to me, stopped acting like you cared whether I lived or died? But now, because another woman found me interesting enough to have a conversation with, you want to talk about respect? That's different," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "How is it different? Explain to me how ignoring your husband for 2 years is respectful, but having a conversation with someone else isn't." She was getting defensive now, classic deflection. "I haven't been ignoring you. We live in the same house. We talk every day. We coordinate logistics. That's not the same as actually communicating. When was the last time you asked me how my day was and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time you initiated any kind of physical contact? When was the last time you acted like you were happy to see me?" Silence stretched between us. She couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. "You know what the really sad part is?" I continued. "I spent 2 years trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, what I could do differently to get my own wife to show some interest in me. And tonight I had a normal conversation with another woman, and you're more engaged with me right now than you've been in months. So what? You're saying this is my fault?" "I'm saying you don't get to check out of our marriage for 2 years, and then get upset when I start checking out too. You don't get to ignore me until another woman shows interest and then suddenly become territorial." She was quiet for a long moment. then said something that showed just how little she understood what had been happening. "I didn't know you felt ignored." I stared at her in disbelief. "You didn't know? How could you not know? I told you multiple times. I tried to talk to you about it. I suggested counseling. I asked you directly what was wrong, and every time you dismissed it or turned it back on me. I thought you were just being dramatic." "Dramatic," I repeated slowly. "Right. Wanting basic affection from my wife was dramatic. Wanting actual conversations was dramatic. Wanting to feel like you cared about our marriage was dramatic." I got out of the car and headed for the house. She followed, still trying to justify herself, still trying to make the night about what I had done wrong, instead of what she had been doing wrong for years. But something had definitely changed. For the first time in a long time, I had her full attention. The question was whether it was too little, too late. The next morning, I woke up to something I hadn't experienced in 2 years. She was already awake, sitting up in bed looking at me, not scrolling through her phone, not staring at the ceiling, but actually looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Good morning," she said, with more warmth than I'd heard in months. I nodded and got up to start my routine. Gym first, then coffee, then work. Same schedule I'd been following for the past few months. But as I was getting dressed, I noticed she was still watching me. "You've been working out a lot lately," she said, like she was just noticing. "Yeah, for about 3 months now." I didn't elaborate. If she wanted to know more, she could ask. I wasn't volunteering information to someone who had only just discovered I existed. Over the next few days, her behavior changed dramatically. She started asking about my day when I came home. She'd position herself in the kitchen while I made dinner, trying to start conversations. She even suggested we watch a movie together, something she hadn't done in over a year. It was fascinating to watch. The woman who had been completely indifferent to my presence was now trying to insert herself into every part of my routine. She'd find excuses to touch me, brief contacts on the arm or shoulder that felt calculated rather than natural. She'd laugh at jokes that weren't particularly funny, agree with opinions she'd never cared about before. The effort was obvious, and, honestly, too obvious. After 2 years of being treated like a roommate who occasionally helped with bills, I wasn't interested in playing along with her sudden change of heart. I stayed polite but distant, engaged but never enthusiastic. On Thursday, she crossed a line that showed just how desperate she was getting. I came home from the gym to find her in the kitchen wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years. She had made dinner, set the table with candles, the whole romantic setup. "I thought we could have a nice evening together," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I looked at the scene and felt nothing but irritation. What's the occasion? Do I need an occasion to make dinner for my husband? You haven't needed one for 2 years, so why start now? Her smile faltered. "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about us not connecting. I want to work on that. Now you want to work on it." I sat down but didn't touch the food. "What changed your mind?" She couldn't meet my eyes. "I realized I haven't been the wife you deserve." "What you realized is that other women find me attractive. That's what changed your mind. Not some sudden insight about being a better wife, but the fact that someone else showed interest in what you've been ignoring. That's not true, isn't it? Where was this effort last month? Where was it on our anniversary? Where was it any time over the past 2 years when I was actually trying to connect with you?" She was quiet for a moment, then tried a different approach. "Can't we just start over? Can't we try to fix this?" "Fix what exactly? The fact that you only want me when you think someone else might? The fact that it took another woman having a conversation with me to make you remember you're married? I've always known I'm married. You've known you're legally bound to someone who pays half the bills and doesn't cause trouble. That's not the same as being married." The conversation went in circles for a while, her trying to convince me she was sincere, me pointing out that her timing was suspiciously convenient. Eventually she got frustrated and reverted to old patterns. "Fine. If you're not interested in working on our marriage, then what do you want? I want you to stop pretending this sudden interest has nothing to do with what happened at the party. I want you to stop acting like you care about our connection when what you really care about is making sure no one else gets my attention. Maybe I am concerned about other women. Is that so wrong? It's wrong when you've spent 2 years pushing me away and now want to pull me back just because you're feeling territorial. That's not love. That's possession." The fake romantic dinner was abandoned. She cleared the table with sharp, angry movements while I went upstairs to change. When I came back down, she was on the couch with her phone, back to ignoring me. But I could feel the difference. Even when she was pretending to ignore me, she was hyper-aware of everything I was doing, where I was going, who I was texting, what I was planning. She had become suspicious and clingy in a way that was completely unattractive. The woman who had been too busy to notice me for 2 years was now monitoring my every move. She'd ask casual questions about my plans, my friends, my work schedule. She'd find excuses to go through my phone, to check my social media, to see who I was talking to. It was pathetic, and it confirmed everything I'd been thinking about our marriage. She didn't want me. She just didn't want anyone else to have me. That's not a relationship, that's ownership. By the weekend, I had made my decision. Saturday morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. She was still upstairs, probably planning another desperate attempt to get my attention, but I was done playing games. It was time for the conversation we should have had 2 years ago. When she came downstairs, she was wearing one of her nicer outfits and had put on makeup, still trying to win me back with surface-level effort instead of addressing the real issues. She poured herself coffee and sat across from me with that forced smile she'd been using all week. "What are your plans for today?" she asked, fishing. "We need to talk," I said, setting my cup down. The smile disappeared. "About what?" "About this marriage. About what's been happening this week. About what happens next." She shifted uncomfortably. "I thought we were working on things. You've been working on damage control." "That's not the same thing." "What do you mean?" "I mean that 5 minutes of conversation with another woman taught you more about what you were losing than 2 years of me begging for your attention. That's not love. That's panic." She started to protest, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish. For 2 years, I tried everything to get your attention. Dates, gifts, counseling, extra chores, honest conversations. Your response was to make me feel like I was asking for too much just by wanting basic affection from my own wife. I was going through a difficult time. 2 years isn't a difficult time. It's a choice. And you chose to check out of our marriage while expecting me to stay checked in. You chose to treat me like I was invisible, while assuming I'd always be there waiting for you to remember I existed." Her defensive posture was crumbling. "I didn't realize it was that bad." "You didn't realize because you didn't care enough to pay attention. And now that you think someone else might want what you've been ignoring, suddenly you're interested. That's not rekindling romance. That's marking territory. So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying you don't get to ignore me for 2 years, and then flip a switch when you feel threatened. You don't get to treat me like furniture and then get upset when I stop trying to be your husband." She was quiet for a long moment, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand that respect isn't something you give when it's convenient. I want you to understand that a marriage requires effort from both people, not just whoever happens to be trying at the moment. And I want you to understand that I'm not going to accept being treated like a backup plan. I never treated you like a backup plan. You treated me like I was guaranteed, like no matter how little effort you put in, I'd always be here. Well, I'm not guaranteed anymore." The weight of that statement hung in the air. She was starting to understand this wasn't just about one conversation at a party. This was about 2 years of being taken for granted. "Are you saying you want a divorce?" "I'm saying I want a wife who actually wants to be married to me, not someone who only remembers she has a husband when she's worried about losing him. I do want to be married to you." "Since when?" "Since Tuesday when you saw me talking to another woman." "Where was that desire last month, 6 months ago, on our anniversary when you forgot we were even married?" She couldn't answer. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "I'm not going to pretend this week didn't happen. I'm not going to pretend 2 years of neglect can be erased by a few days of panic-driven attention. And I'm not going to accept being wanted only when someone else might want me." "What does that mean?" "It means that if you want to save this marriage, you're going to have to prove you want me for who I am. Not because you're afraid of losing me to someone else. You're going to have to show me you can be a partner, not just a territorial roommate." "How do I do that?" "You figure it out. You spent 2 years figuring out how to ignore me. Now you can spend some time figuring out how to actually be married to me." I stood and put my cup in the sink. "And just so we're clear, I'm not waiting around while you decide. I'm going to keep living my life, keep being the man I've become these past few months. If you want to be part of that life, you're going to have to earn it." She looked stunned. "Where are you going?" "Hiking. That trail I mentioned at the party. Going to check it out. With whoever wants to go hiking with someone who knows how to appreciate good company." I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. She called after me, but I didn't turn around. 2 years of being taken for granted had taught me something valuable. Never accept being treated like you're dispensable. Some lessons are worth learning, even when they cost you everything you thought you wanted. As I drove away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Freedom. The freedom that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less than what you deserve. Whether she figured it out or not was up to her. But I was done being the only one fighting for a marriage that should have been fought for by both of us. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, thank you. Feel free to subscribe. It helps more than you know. I've picked 2 other stories I think you'll love. Click one, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.